Okay, we're recording. I believe this is episode 24, if you can believe it. We are now in chapter 3. We're going to be starting tonight on page 37, Roman free inside the cage. And we're dropping back a couple of pages from where we left off last week. But we're not going to read it all. But what I did want to do, we've entered chapter 3. So, chapter 3, the title is Enneatype as a Protector of the Ego. And what I wanted to do, since this is a really interesting, they've all been kind of interesting chapters, but this one is interesting because we're starting to look at how we can become aware of the way that Enneatype operates in our day-to-day lives, how it is maybe triggering us, how it is uh, keeping us unaware of the actual drivers of our um, behavior and thought patterns. And so this is real key. Everything about contemplation is to become more and more aware of who we are, what are we doing right now, how we're doing it. Because without that awareness in real time, we can't make different decisions. We're just on autopilot. We are the tail is wagging the dog in terms of those unconscious drives and programs, just creating stimulus and response. So this ability to put some awareness between the stimulus and the response, whether it's enneatype or anything else, that is key. And so this chapter is helping us to get some specific ways to be able to do exactly that. And this idea of enneatype as a protector of the ego is just putting a real fine point on why it is we need to do that. How it is that the enneatype is protecting the status quo, is keeping us unaware of what's really driving us, and so on and so forth. So he starts with this discussion of the nine passions. And so I want to read a little bit about that, starting right there, the nine passions at the bottom of page 37, just to kind of pick up and get a running start at the new material that we're going to be doing. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about passions too, because we have a colloquial understanding of that word that is not going to suit us well as we're trying to understand it in the context of the Enneagram. So each type has a passion, sometimes called a vice. The passion is the emotional energy that drives the type. So that should be underlined, highlighted, put on your fridge or whatever, because that's so important to get that concept. The passion is the emotional energy that drives the type. And because it's an emotional energy, that means it's going to be largely, if not completely, unconscious. We're not going to be aware that it's driving the type. We're not going to be aware that it's driving us. He says one can think of it as the felt distillation of a certain form of energy, yin yang or reconciling, through a certain center of experience, body, heart, or head. And since it's a part of the structure rather than the content of the type, the passion usually operates outside of conscious awareness. And we kind of defined a lot of those terms about the structure and the content. The structure being the underlying forms that give rise to the actual content of our personalities that we can describe. If you can describe your personality, if you can describe who you are, that's going to be content. That's going to be part of what he talks about as the me, as opposed to the I, the deeper self that cannot be named. And so since he says that these experiences, this is part of the structure rather than the content of the type, the passion usually operates outside of conscious awareness. The passions form early in childhood as babies discover that their original energy is too much for their caregivers to support and nourish. They find they must limit and clamp down on that energy so they can stay in relationship with the adults who care for them. They do so by relying more and more on one form of life energy and one center of processing experience, so that either be yin, yang, or reconciling, or body, heart, and mind. The Enneagram calls the constricted versions of that original energy the nine passions. Corresponding to each passion is the type's virtue, which is the unconstricted version of the passion. In this section, we will focus on the passions. If you have read other books on the Enneagram, you already know that the nine passions are those nasty words placed at the head of the description of each Enneatype as follows. And then he goes right through 1 through 9: anger, pride, vainglory, envy, avarice, fear, gluttony, lust, and sloth. What I wanted to do was take a little bit deeper dive into the passions And let's really define it, okay? Y'all seeing my screen?
Yes,
Is it large enough to actually read? Hopefully.
not for my eyes.
Okay, well, we can't just go by the most blind person in the room, but we will see what we can do here. Okay, hopefully that's
That's much better.
all right, good. So here's a working definition of passion. Passion is a powerful, intense emotion or strong liking for a person, activity, idea, or cause, often involving deep enthusiasm, desire, or affection, leading to fulfillment and motivation, and can range from a hobby to a driving life force. The word also historically refers to the sufferings of Jesus in Christian tradition, influencing terms like passion plays. So here's some key aspects. Strong emotion. It's a compelling feeling, more intense than just interest, characterized by excitement or deep connection. Okay, starting to get the idea here. It can be a deep interest, an object or activity one feels strongly about, finding deep enjoyment and satisfaction in it. A motivation. It can provide a powerful drive, guiding actions and giving life meaning, such as pursuing a fulfilling career or a cause. Now, the range. It applies to romantic love, to creative pursuits like art and music, intellectual interests, spiritual devotion, or even intense suffering, as in the Passion of the Christ. The origin comes from the Greek word pashkin, which means to suffer, connecting it to intense emotional states and historically linked to Christ's suffering. So as you just look through the key aspects, and this comes from completely outside of any context with the Enneagram or the Enneatype, but you can start to see just from what we've read in Schafer's book how how the passions understood this way are applying, I hope. Examples in different contexts. In a personal life, a passion for painting, hiking, or helping others could be a passion. Religion, the passion of Christ, referring to his suffering and crucifixion. Music and arts, the musical passion, or musical works about Christ's passion. And movements, the Passion Conference is a Christian movement focused on faith and service. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of what we mean when we're talking about passion. When we say passionate, usually that has to do with romantic love, has to do with, intense feelings of eros or whatever. But we want to have the largest and broadest spectrum to understanding what it is we're talking about when we talk about the passions. So the things to remember about these passions are that they're born of sort of a precognitive fear in the infant. Before the infant can think in terms of language, the infant already can experience presence. He talked about that precognitive sense of presence, a perfect presence because it's not interrupted by any kind of thoughts or concepts or language because the infant doesn't have those yet. And yet, in that vulnerable space, the infant is going to get neglected, going to get possibly traumatized. There's going to be times when needs are not instantaneously met, even in a benevolent way. But the infant starts to learn that it's not the center of the universe, you know. And as child development goes on, the infant is learning that he or she has to be different than they are in order to be accepted. Some of the things they do are not accepted by these beings around them. And so they start learning what kind of behaviors, what kind of responses get uh, acceptance and love and meeting their needs and which ones don't. And so they start creating their shadow, basically, repressing the traits that are not being rewarded and projecting the ones that are.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about good or bad here. We're just talking about what is helpful or unhelpful in terms of meeting the infant's needs. And so out of this is, these shadow elements. It's so important because we think of those as being negative or being bad. They're not necessarily bad. They're just maybe out of context at that point in the child's life, out of context in terms of the family dynamic in which they're being acted out. Or maybe they're just before their time. These traits will be very useful later on in life, but right now they're getting the kid spanked. And so what the child ends up doing then is creating a reliance more and more on a primary emotional energy as the one that drives them to the best advantage. And they find that becomes more and more the one that they go to. It's unconscious emotional drives or an interest or a motivation. And it can look like a vice to those who are judging some things, or it can look like a sin. So these, seven deadly sins plus the two that give us the passions of the Enneatype were identified early on as the cardinal sins, the ones that led to a lot of other unsavory behavior. But we're not looking at them as a sin in terms of being unlawful, right? In terms of being something against God's order in the sense that the law would state. But really that these are energies or actions that are misplaced, that have been somehow skewed and no longer serve the relationship, no longer serve the individual. And so what we want to do is try to get it out of the vein of looking at these, even though we call them vices, as sins, or that there's something wrong with us. They're not. They're just reactions to experience, especially early on, that's now been carried forward into adulthood. Any thoughts and additions?
Oh yeah,
Go for it.
bunch of questions.
Go for it.
So I'm way back on the passion usually operates outside of conscious awareness, top of page 38. So everything that you showed us in your definition of passion is very conscious for me. May not have been all the time, but at the moment it is. I'm pretty confident that I have conscious awareness of all of the passions, except for the one that is connected to my type. I don't know what that feels like. And so my question is, if you identify the passion and the feelings that go with it, and you can put it into the context of, yes, I experienced this, is it no longer your passion now that it is conscious?
No, I don't think so. But I think once it becomes conscious, what you can do is you can start to identify whether this emotional drive is helpful or not, whether it's connective or not. And then you can start to make some decisions about whether you want to continue it or not. As soon as it becomes conscious, you have the ability to choose. If your awareness is present real time at the moment of the choice. Now you can choose
which
it
it isn't. I just know that there must be something there.
Okay, well, until you know what that something is in real time, there it is again. There's that tug. There's that feeling. Remember at the beginning of this chapter, he said, you need to learn what these feel like because it's so important because that's going to be your only clue. You don't understand what's going on, but you sure feel it. And if you start to associate the feeling with certain types of behavior that create certain types of predictable results that you don't want anymore, now you can start to use the feeling as the light on the dashboard to say, okay, I'm still not totally clear about what's going on, but I do need to take a breath here. I need to stop. And before I act, do something. Put some filter in between that stimulus and response.
I got
and
it,
even
Dave.
with these interests that you say that you understand, whether it's music or a hobby or whatever, you understand that you love these things and feel passionately about them. But do you really know why?
Oh, so with music, yes, but not so much with the others, right?
Exactly. So
I
there
can make
may
a real
be,
why out of.
yeah, we may not have a why for these. We know that we feel passionately about this or that or this person or this activity, but we don't necessarily know why it motivates us so much.
Yeah.
And getting down into that, what is the real drive? Sometimes I ask people, if you could be doing anything you wanted right now, regardless of age or money or training or anything, what would it be? Most people can't answer that question. They don't know. And so I tell them, well, if you don't know, then it would be a good thing for you to find out. What would it be? Because even if you tell me you want to be an astronaut and you're 56 years old, okay, or a ballerina, and we know that ship has sailed, what is it about being an astronaut or a ballerina that gives you that passion? What is it? And if you can identify that, then you can find other activities that incorporate that deeper, more universal drive. And that can be just as, maybe as, hopefully as fulfilling as if you could have done the actual task that you had identified first. And so there's still this drilling down that needs to happen in this. So, but you're right. Some of these, in terms of the passions themselves, we know what the task is, but do we know what the task within the task is?
Yeah.
I think the way passions were explained to me tracks more with Bill's experience in that they said the passions on the Enneagram are passive, in that they are like, we don't have to try to gravitate towards these impulses, basically. There's something that naturally pulls us in that direction. It's kind of like rolling downhill, right? And it takes effort to go in the opposite direction and practice I guess the virtues are the opposite of the passions. So it takes effort to rise to the top of the hill, but we can just relax and float downhill.
I think it's below the level of even being passive, though, William. I think it's just plain unawareness. Because until I decided to do this thought experiment on myself, I couldn't explain. It's like I'd been in the water all the time and didn't realize there was air above it.
Right, right. Yeah. And I think just to distinguish some of the passions you just highlighted, Dave, like things that I'm passionate about, like I think that is different from what the Enneagram is calling them, right? Like,
I feel that. I felt the experience of that, William. I agree.
yeah.
I don't know I think what we're maybe confusing is the task and the task within. When we talk about the Ennea type passions, we're talking about the task within. But if you think about what does anger cause you to typically do?
Hmm.
See, that's going to vary with different people, but the anger is the core issue, or fear or gluttony or any of those. It's the same thing. We looked at some of these passions over here outside of the context of the Enneagram. And yes, we can say, oh, this hobby, this person, spiritual devotion, whatever it happens to be. But if we drill down to what it is that drives us, and it's going to feel like you called it passive in the sense that it's rolling downhill. Why do I like music so much? I don't have to try to like music, but I've dedicated so much friggin' time over the last 50 years to it. Why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep coming back to it? There's aspects to that I just love, and I don't remember having to try to like it. It's just always been there. So I think that's exactly what you were saying. That's the way the passions operate. Until we uncover them and find out what is down there and operating, it's like a groove that we're always just going to be following along that groove unless we expend the effort you were talking about to jump the groove and go somewhere else.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you like music and enjoying it, maybe it's genetics, maybe it's your personality, and then you say, why do I like it so much? Does it matter why? Just
Mm.
enjoy it?
It wouldn't matter to music, but if music is destroying my relationships around me, and I get to the point where my relationships are important to me and I want to preserve them, then I need to figure out what's going on. I mean, if it's benevolent, if there's nothing broke, then you don't fix it. If it's not a problem, then it's not a problem. But if it's becoming a problem or you identify it as a problem, then it's something that needs to be investigated.
Mhm. Mhm.
Music, though, is just something that I feel passionate about. The original passion I can discover in all kinds of things.
And I bet that you could ask Marion if she thinks that my love of music has ever been a problem in our relationship over the last 35 years, because I know it's gotten in the way.
Yes,
See,
I'm still here.
she is. But she had to jump the groove in order to get to stay with me. But that's the thing. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem. And some of our passions are it's all good, until it gets overly obsessive or it causes us to become unaware of other things that are ultimately more important. And then we need to take a look and find
Wait a
out
minute, there
what
are
is
things that are
going on.
more important than music?
I think there might be, Bill, if you really look. Yeah.
But see, this
Okay.
is my question. So let's say Michelangelo, he has that passion of his art, his sculpture. But then his wife says, "No, I don't want you to do that David statue. You got to wash the dishes and you have to do the laundry to help me." Which one is detrimental? The passion for the art, or you're not washing the dishes for your wife? Like, what is detrimental? I understand the relationship with the husband and wife, yes, but how about the bigger picture for the world?
Mm. Well, back in those days, men
Yeah,
didn't do dishes, so we didn't.
I know, but that's an example, honey.
Plus, the Medicis and the Pope are pretty big customers.
That's right. They give them, yeah, they're the patrons, right? There's
Hey,
also that comes that
let's
decision you
face
make.
it, the more passionate you are, the more impossible it is to have a relationship with you. Do
Ah,
you realize that? You
Mm,
know, the truly, completely creative, passionate people, their personal lives were a shambles. I was
Yeah.
just talking about Charlie Parker on Sunday.
Yeah,
He is the greatest, possibly the greatest jazz musician of the 20th century. Everybody idolized him. He died at 34 of cirrhosis and pneumonia due to heroin addiction and alcohol addiction. He had been married 4 times and he was a mess. You can't have a relationship with a person like that. So unless yeah, well, maybe it took that much passion for him to be as good as he is. And yes, he's for the ages now. But was that his primary purpose to be as a human being here on this earth? Is it ours to leave some sort of legacy? I mean, that was the whole question of the message on Sunday. Is our purpose here to leave this legacy for the ages, or is it to discover certain things about love and life and relationship that somehow this life uniquely provides? Those are questions that we have to answer, each one of us, and then try to find a balance. It's not that we don't work hard. It's not that we don't strive for excellence. It's not that we don't even work to leave some sort of legacy that'll better mankind. But if we do it at the expense of now, if we do it at the expense of personal relationships, then we're unbalanced.
mhm.
mm.
Yeah, I remember one of your earlier thoughts, Dave, was the more passionate you are about any topic, the more inflexible you become around
Mm.
that topic, like politics or religion or anything else.
Mhm.
And it just becomes more and more difficult to interact with somebody if they're not open-minded and passionate.
Mhm. It takes a heck of a lot of awareness to manage your passion and to keep it bright and yet still be aware of the people who are around you and trying to share the moment with you. You got to be so aware. I think we could probably say, that Jesus was the most passionate human who lived. And yet, look what he was still able to do because of the balance and the awareness that he had. And that's the key. Is if we can do that, then we can start to balance these things. And yes, it'll be a pendulum. Yes, it'll be an oscillation, and we're going to go in and out of focus. But at least we realize when we do, and then we're working to bring ourselves back. So jumping to page 39, last paragraph, as you can see, y'all with me?
Mhm.
As you can see, the passions do not place very high on the scale of desirable human qualities. Perceiving them in action generates sufficient self-criticism that most people avoid noticing them. That's a real important point. You get that? These
Mhm.
passions are not things we're going to be proud of. These passions are things we're not going to want anyone to know that we carry. And we're going to be projecting everything else but those. So perceiving them in action, becoming aware enough that we actually see them in action at the moment generates sufficient self-criticism that most people avoid noticing them. We don't want to feel that way. We don't want to feel that guilt. We don't want to feel that shame. This is the whole the whole purpose of having a type. A type is simply a collection of habits that more or less guarantees that you will not consciously experience your particular passion. Did you get that? It's a collection of habits that more or less guarantees that you will not consciously experience your particular passion. You get so lost in the habits, in the ritual, in the doing. It's kind of like you're not going to see the forest anymore for the trees. You're just going from tree to tree to tree, from response, 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 reaction to reaction. And so it's guaranteeing that you're not going to be able to dig down because you won't even realize that there's something to dig down for. You're going to be oblivious to the harm that you're doing, kind of like Mr. Magoo, walking obliviously through, leaving a trail of wreckage, but you're not going to see it in yourself. Whenever you engage in the habitual preoccupations of type, you will probably be spared the unpleasantness of recognizing that you are indulging in anger, pride, vainglory, envy, greed, fear, gluttony, lust, or sloth. And that feels good, which is why learning to feel your type in action is so hard. Perceiving it will at first make you feel worse. This is the basic reason why type is so stable throughout the lifespan. The more skillful type's activity becomes, the less you experience the passion that fuels it. So it's totally getting lost in the forest for the trees, lost in the rituals, lost in the patterns that keeps us from seeing the underlying motivation for all of this. What are those emotional drives? If you think about it, this is basically what all psychology is about, isn't it? Helping us to see the underlying drives that are creating the habitual thought and behavior patterns that are creating the problems that we're coming to the therapist for in the first place. But without diving down into those underlying drives and maybe what caused them, we can treat the symptoms, and you can do it in a sort of CBT way, which maybe can then retro you back. But we really got to get to the symptoms, the causes, and not just the symptoms. Now he says, let me make that a little more concrete. I'm a 6, and my passion is fear. If you had asked me 40 years ago whether or not I was a fearful person, I would have said, of course not. I would have explained to you that I was a careful person, one who thought and analyzed and required evidence. Where's the fear in that? In other words, we make a virtue out of it, right? But let's make the example even more realistic. 40 years ago, I might not have answered your question with any directness. As soon as you asked it, I would have wondered why you were asking me if I was afraid. What were you trying to do? And without thinking, I would have come up with an answer that changed the subject to something else. The entire response would have emerged so quickly and smoothly that the tiny moment of fear when you first asked me the question would never have even appeared in my consciousness. So we're talking about a deflection here, maybe even a placing blame, imputing motives on the questioner, all these things that would happen so quickly, that we don't even realize we're doing it, but we're protecting the ego. We're protecting ourselves from having to actually admit that there's something kind of gnarly down there. This is how type successfully prevents a person from experiencing a passion that runs his life, but which he has been avoiding for years. Type is so well practiced and so well honed that it does its job. It just does its job without us needing to think about it. This is why Gurdjieff, who reintroduced the Enneagram to Europe in the early 20th century, called type a form of falling asleep. And this is what contemplatives and mystics are working against constantly, because most of us do sleepwalk through life. If we're not aware, if we're not present, if we don't understand what's going on in the moment of decision, we're just reverting back to old programming. That's all unconscious. We're literally sleepwalking. And this is how the ego is protected, by keeping the I, the deeper person, unaware of all this machinery, everything that's going on. And that way the ego can maintain its illusions and maintain its projections, and no change is even seen as necessary. But that's what spiritual formation is all about. That's what therapy is all about, is getting that awareness back so that we can see what's actually in operation. I'm taking a breath and honoring the silence.
I like that. I like that take, because when I think back on my younger self, like I always considered myself to be a bit of a peacemaker, like easy to get along with, pleasant things of that nature. But it's like you can be a peacemaker by avoiding conflict and avoiding, anything that looks like an argument, or you can be a peacemaker that moves into conflict and helps to create peace, essentially. Um, and I was in my younger years, I think I was much more the former, the avoiding part, and that is just so automatic and people saw me as being agreeable and likable and easy to get along with and so on and so forth. But there was a lot of avoidance blended in there.
So think about it, William. If you're an avoidant peacemaker, who are you making peace for?
Yourself, yeah.
Exactly. And not too much anyone else.
So, Dave, how do you explain the fact that the world is so polarized right now? It seems like everybody has either this type or that.
Mm.
I think it can go right along with what we're talking about. You know, the people on the extremes who are the most polarized one, who get all the ink and the attention in the media, are the ones who are the most passionate, right? And so there's an emotional drive that's driving them, and it's being channeled into whatever it's being channeled into. If we're talking politics right now, then it's being channeled into their particular political beliefs. It's being channeled into certain social issues or events or situations as they are happening. But there's no awareness there. They don't even they're passionate. They feel this drive. It's channeled here, but they're not taking the time to actually put that space between the stimulus and the response to see, is this response the best response, the most inclusive response, the one that is going to create the best outcome for the most people for the longest period of time in that utilitarian sort of way. It's just knee jerk. It's just acting. And then, and as we were just saying, the more passionate you are, the more impossible it is to have a relationship. And the more passionate you are, the more inflexible you are, the more you are certain of your own rightness. So you're not going to listen to any other point of view. You're just reflexively going to push back. And I think that's what we're seeing. So these are the passions completely unbridled with no kind of mitigation whatsoever.
No, I am not sure. Like you mentioned the political landscape, Bill. I think Trump is a type 3 on the Enneagram, the performer. Uh, I heard people describe him as being a type 8, but I see the vainglory there, like the passion of vanity. Um, whether you're a Trump supporter or not, I think that is present in how he conducts himself. It's all about, look at my name on the side of the building, right? Like I've had the biggest crowds in history, better than Lincoln and Washington, right? And so on and so forth. So that passion is always showing up there, at least from my lens, it's always showing up there for him.
Now, having made the comment that I made and what William's talking about too, it doesn't have anything to do with whether you're right or not on a particular issue. You could be absolutely right, and you can still be completely in an unbridled way, subservient to your passion. And so that some of the decisions that you'll make and the way that you'll carry out your rightness will still be injurious to others. And so we're not talking about right and wrong here. We're talking about how you are conducting yourselves in terms of a whole person, an integrated, holistic person. Do you have a handle on what's going on down there so that in any given moment you can make the best decision that love would require to create the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people in that moment?
Can you point to anyone alive right now in the world, anybody who has the rattling free inside the cage thing down? They're able to represent a more full, what would you call that? A more complete mastery of the
Bill,
passions?
yeah, such an interesting question. Off the top of my head, what I would first say is that anyone wants a job that we would be aware of should be disqualified from having it. Remember that idea? Or it's like if you're in the media already, if you have already garnered that much attention, then you're probably operating on some passions that are somewhat unbridled.
Yeah,
I
that's kind of
think
why I was
people,
asking. Like Mother Teresa, does she, or
yeah,
Gandhi?
there's you can always go back to a Mother Teresa,
Mm,
something like that, and she was kind of thrust into the spotlight almost not by her own promotion, but merely by attraction. I'd say if you can find someone who is like that, whose notoriety has been attracted and not promoted, then you have a chance of finding someone who has this deeper awareness.
Like
Of the
Father
people
Richard,
that I'm
or
just thinking of, just in the
yeah.
media right now, I'm not getting any flashes of inspiration.
Yeah, my first thought was Richard Rohr.
Mhm.
And
There's
yet,
or
the
who's the
several
Quaker?
of our people went to his living school and they walked away kind of disheartened, especially earlier on. This was 10 years ago,
Mhm.
because he had gotten so political. What I have noticed in him is a softening of a lot of the political rhetoric, but it was pretty harsh there for a while. And I think he kind of lost his way. Maybe he's pulled back, or maybe he just got older,
Mm.
spends more time in his hermitage. I don't know. But at least I don't have any way of really knowing. But they were in the same room with him and talking to him and listening to him. And they came away with the impression that, he was kind of lost his way a little bit in that direction.
I know I'm still holding on for this, but how about the Dalai Lama
Mm. Yeah,
or
why not?
Bishop Tutu? I mean, I don't know. I'm throwing names here because I can't think of a better thing to do. But
there's a physician who died maybe about a year ago. His name is Paul Farmer. He dedicated his life in service to others. It's like his ego is gone.
Mm.
This was his purpose. And he died like he was 60 something, so he was still young. But it's yeah, something you could somebody who could look up, Paul Farmer.
Mm.
It's
So
like the
if that were true and not just PR, then that would be an example of someone we're talking
yeah.
about. But it's so hard for us to know from a distance. The people who know are the ones who are hanging their toothbrush next to that person. They're the ones who know.
Right. And you can have somebody who is doing great things, but they're still doing it out of this passion, right? Like I'm a giver. I want to be recognized as being
Right,
generous and,
right.
self-sacrificing and so on and so forth. So it's not the action, it's
Right,
why we are engaged in that action, like
right.
what's motivating it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this group of women who went to Israel. Um, and they were wearing t-shirts. You see, this is what we did, and this is what we did. And people criticized this group of women because they're showing off their t-shirts that they volunteered for 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was, and they showed it on Facebook and TikTok. And so, yeah, people were slamming them. What are
Mhm.
you doing this for?
Yeah. It's like they've talked about the people who give to charity and they're doing it because they want to be recognized, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
nothing wrong with giving, and the charity certainly appreciates it. But if you're doing it because you want to be glorified or seen as super generous and a good Christian, then you're you're already on the wrong branch, basically.
Yeah, and we don't want to be in the business of judging anybody here.
Right.
Sometimes it's really hard not to form opinions in what we see, but other times, we just give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You
but
know.
Dave, I got to put you on the spot one more time. I didn't know if
Oh
you'd go there right away,
no!
but I've got
Cut
an
it out.
example, not living example, but anybody on this. So anybody want to take on a type analysis of Jesus?
Ooh.
And Dave, I'm asking because I think you're qualified to do that and sort of hold up the examples there. You don't have to do it tonight, but put the question aside later if you need to.
Mm,
I think that in the absence of ego, there is no type.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
For me, Jesus is spinning in the pivot of Tao. Jesus is at the center of the wheel. He has the ability, and this is what I love about the stories in the Gospels, is that they show Jesus basically shapeshifting to every situation and person that he encounters. I love when he's approaching the tomb where Lazarus has been entombed, and he first encounters Mary, and he has this intellectual discussion with her because that's what she needs. That's where her head's at. And then a few paces more, he encounters Mary, and what does he do? He weeps with her because that's where she's at. And then he goes to the tomb and he calls forth, the dead. You see him moving from person to person and situation to situation and bringing all 9 of the types to bear as they are needed. He has that under his command. And so, yeah, typing him, as a child, I'm sure he had a type. And then somehow when he got out of the wilderness and he said, I and the Father are one, he was at the center of the wheel. And that's what we see preserved for us in the Gospels.
And there is a lot of, like, the more
Thank you.
the more healthy we are in our types, the more we begin to look like the other types, essentially.
Yeah, it's like that. I remember I talked to you guys about DISC, DISC. It's a workplace, workplace style for people. But what they do, and it's just 4 quadrants. And so the D is dominant, the I is influencer, the S is stability, and the C is conscientious. And so when you take their questionnaire, the computer actually plots a point within the circle of where you land. And so the closer you are to the circumference, the more you resemble that type. The closer you are to the center of the pie shape, the more that you take on all of the types and you have less of that characteristic, even though that's still primarily you. And the closer you are to one border or another, the more you take on the characteristics of the type that is adjacent. And so I like that. And I think, if you got sophisticated enough with the Enneagram, you could do the same thing, where, yeah, you fall in one of these 9 slices primarily, but your position closer to the circumference, closer to the center, closer here, would give you more of a sense of where you are in all of this. And I think wherever we start in the wheel, and probably early on, we're really close to the circumference. But the more that we do the work and the more that we continue to move through spiritual formation, the more we migrate closer and closer to the center.
Yeah, because going back to the name of this section, right? Like the Enneagram is the protector of the ego. So I think what Brady said is spot on, right? So if Christ was functioning from this egoless place, he has no need for a type, essentially.
He was human, though, so he had to have some of that in there. So the choice to not function from the ego is the challenge.
Right.
That's it. And it's a choice you make every single moment. You don't make it once and for all.
Man, I need a break.
Every moment is a choice. Are you in kingdom? Are you out of kingdom? Are you present? Are you not? And that's a choice that we make. Now, the more you make the choice, the more that it becomes automatic, and that becomes your groove. And you almost have to do something different to get out of the groove. But it's still a choice that you're making every moment. And we know that. You have a good day, you have a bad day. Well, why? Well, I didn't choose to be present today. I chose to stay inside my head and be a victim. That's a bad day. But tomorrow I can wake up and I can choose something different.
And going back to this idea of the passions being passive, it feels like we're not making a choice when we slip into that passive role almost.
Exactly. It feels normal. It just feels like who we are.
It's our nature.
And if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. If it's not broke, you don't fix it. But if it is, be honest and admit that your life has become unmanageable and that you are powerless to do something directly about this. But if you will connect, then that power greater than yourselves can and will restore your lives to sanity. Okay, let's do a little bit more reading so I can at least say we covered some positive territory tonight. Perceiving type in action at the bottom of page 40. This is where he's actually going to start talking to us about, okay, what can we do about all this? Okay, we described the water, but we're still drowning here. So what can we do about this? He says all of this suggests that the first steps of self-transformation as you begin working with the Enneagram will be difficult. Okay, just take that to the bank. They require that you search for a sensation, feeling, and state of mind that you automatically avoid. Now, think about how difficult that's going to be. You've successfully avoided it for 40 or 50 years, and now you're going to try to become aware of it. And it's not going to be pleasant when you do. So everything in you is going to recoil from this work, right? But this is what it is. It's trying to search for that sensation, feeling, or state of mind that you automatically avoid. This is counterintuitive. Why go looking for something that feels bad when you have already learned to escape awareness of its presence and you've learned to do that really well? This seems a recipe for insanity, not growth. And so what we're talking about here is reflection. It's what when we were Catholics growing up, it's called an examination of conscience. Any of you remember that? There are really, really sophisticated and in-depth printed examinations of conscience that you were supposed to do and could do before you went to confession in the Catholic faith. And they could be based on a lot of different precepts, based on the Ten Commandments, based on this, based on that, asking you all these pertinent questions. If you were saying, well, I don't really know what my sins are, well, here you go. Here's a 10-page questionnaire. You fill this out, you're going to have all kinds of sins to report to the priest, you know. But I'm making some jest there, but this is the kind of thing that we actually would need to do, have some reflection, do some examination, and not being concerned with just what's unlawful, but what's unhelpful. What is unhelpful to where we really want to go? What's unhelpful to the quality of our relationships and the quality of our lives? You know, if that is a problem for us, then maybe there is something broke that we need to fix. So the reason to go looking for one's passion is that it is the emotional engine that keeps the whole egoic self looking for a false payoff. For example, the passion for type 7 is gluttony. Gluttony is the yang energy behind the 7's continual need to taste a little of this, a little of that, always skittish about anything that looks slightly dull or painful. Gluttony fuels the 7's entire mental manner of processing experience, causing the person to move like a butterfly from idea to idea, from one pleasant option to another. Gluttony is the emotional component to the 7's mental conviction that suffering in any form, once entertained, will never go away. There is that basic fear and basic drive. As long as it remains unconscious, that conviction can remain unchallenged and intact. As you begin the work of self-transformation, you may discover that your passion is hard to find. First of all, you may not even know your type with any certainty. And there's been a lot of us here in that spot, right? Actually, that is not a bad state of mind to be in. Many people quickly determine that they are this or that type, only to find out several years later that they were mistaken. Knowing your type is really less important than inquiring within about the energies and processes that motivate you. And that's another one for your fridge, right? What are we talking about? This is Jesus' teaching style. He's not interested in giving you an answer to your question. That's counterproductive. And it reinforces the whole egoic process that he's trying to break down in us. So he's never going to give us an answer to the question. He's going to engage us in a process. He's going to tell us a story. He's going to answer another question. He's going to have a complete non sequitur, whatever he needs to do to break the line of thinking and cause a cognitive dissonance that's going to take us on some sort of journey. So if the answer does not come quickly, don't worry. The inquiry will often be far more beneficial than the answer. So begin your inquiry with a search for the underlying feeling or motivation that drives your habitual behavior. Keep the list of 9 passions in the background at first and look for your own words to describe your basic motives. If one of the 9 passions begins to emerge as a likely candidate, check it out with someone who knows you intimately. Don't rush to conclusions. And if you have friends who are somewhat familiar with the Enneagram, receive their suggestions gratefully, but with a grain of salt. Everybody's going to have suggestions for you, right? If you have a trained Enneagram teacher available, go for a consultation. But always remember this: only you can discover what motivates you. Looking for that motivation at the innermost level is an important part of the process of self-transformation. Don't shortchange yourself. Again, this is absolutely Jesus' teaching style. It is an Eastern teaching style. It's not unique to Jesus, but they know that it is this process, engaging this process, being willing to let all of your preconceptions go in the process, to get back to the place of beginner's mind in the process. That's what's important. Not coming to some prepackaged answer that you can just try to move from certainty to certainty. That's going to do us no good.
Mm-hmm.
But to move from certainty to uncertainty and then to conviction, that's completely different. Realizing we will never get to certainty. Certainty is the opposite of faith. Certainty is the death. Certainty puts us into stasis. Certainty makes us inflexible because there is no certainty. It's only an illusion. But if we can move from certainty to uncertainty and then to conviction through experience and discernment, that's a whole different animal. And unfortunately, it's not comfortable. It's very difficult, it's painful, and it's scary to do this because we have to admit our powerlessness and that our life has become unmanageable, right? And we don't want to do that. We want to move from certainty to certainty. That's why we want some really strong teacher just to give us the answer so that we can move right directly there without
Yeah.
any problems in between.
But it's the answer we want.
Right.
Amen. Amen.
I like your distinction there because we can so often confuse conviction with certainty, right?
Yeah, because they are not the same. Now they can operate the same. Remember that great story that Brendan Manning told about Mother Teresa and what was it, Kavanaugh? Joseph Kavanaugh. Anyway, he was a pretty famous Jesuit priest and scholar and professor here in the United States. And he hit his bottom and just lost his way. So he took a sabbatical and went to India and spent time with Mother Teresa at the Houses of the Poor in Calcutta. And first day he's there and he meets her and they greet each other. And then he says, "Oh, Mother, please pray for me." And she says, "What shall I pray for?" "Of course I will. What should I pray for?" He says, "Pray that I might find clarity." And she says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And he's shocked. "Well, why not?" She says, "Because clarity is the last thing that you are clinging to and need to let go of." And he says, "But you seem to have such clarity." And she just laughs and says, "I don't have clarity. What I have is trust. I'll pray that you find trust." See, that's the difference between the two. A person with conviction to the outside looks like they have certainty. Looks like they have clarity. They look like one of those mountain goats that never misses a step, going almost straight up the side of a cliff. But from their point of view, they haven't got any more certainty than you've got. But what they've found is trust. What they've found is the conviction that they are held, that they're cared for, that this is all going to be okay in the end somehow, some way that they can't see yet. And so they're just putting one foot down in front of the other, as you are, but they have the conviction that it's going to land on something solid. And so conviction can operate like certainty in our lives, but we'll never be able to prove it to anybody else. And if you're trying to prove it to somebody else, then you think you've got certainty. And then you're back on the merry-go-round again.
Yeah, that's good.
You know what it says here on, 2/3 down, if you have a trained Enneagram teacher available, go for a consultation. So I wanted so much certainty. The first thing that popped in my head, oh, let me ask William. I was ready to say, I want to consult with you.
Yeah, we can consult, but I'm not going to offer you any certainty.
That's a good answer.
I want to be a consultant under those terms.
I trust you.
Yeah, we all want to be uncertain consultants. Now, there's a marketing ploy, right? Come to me for uncertainty.
I can do that really well.
And therein lies the rub, right? Rohr himself said in Everything Belongs in the just the author's note, he says, how do you market, you know, contemplation? How do you market something that is inherently unmarketable because it's not certain? How do you do that? And the answer is you don't. There's no way to do that. And so there's always going to be a subset of the population that's going to be attracted to the kind of thing that we're talking about here, because it's not the mainstream. And the more things get uncertain out there, the more you long for some sort of certainty in here. But if we can start getting to the place of conviction, it can operate the same in our lives. But we just understand, it's not the content of our conviction that is certain, it's the connection that's certain, and that's different.
There's
title of that book again.
There's a famous quote, and I'll try and be accurate, and it goes like this: the person who's asking for advice is really asking for an accomplice.
That's good.
So I just came up with this just now when Brady was talking. So Dr. Brady, Dr. Gordon, do you think I'm depressed? And what's the answer? Maybe. Like what? What?
So this is good stuff. This is putting the finger right on the pulse of where we're at, what's going on. And so the more we can get comfortable with some of these terms and some of these concepts, the more that we can continue to relinquish that which needs to be relinquished. Because it's a journey of subtraction and not addition, as we're constantly saying. But even as we say that, even as we intellectually agree and our head goes up and down, we're fighting it inside all the way, because what we really want is that certainty. We want
And I was thinking about Ellen's question. Like, if you answer that question, right, either in the yes, you're depressed or not depressed, that offering of certainty is not really satisfying at all, right? It doesn't it doesn't help. Right?
Yeah. I think that's when if somebody's really looking for certainty, that's when because we have a term too called doctor hopping. You go from one until you find what you want to hear because it's not satisfying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's what Brady's talking about, right? You're looking for an accomplice. Yeah. Cool. Well, this is a good place to leave it. I'm sorry we didn't get further forward, but I think it was good to go back and just spend a little more time with this idea of the passions, because we can say that really quickly and it just goes right over our heads. But hopefully this locked it down a little bit more. But do think about this, and spend some time, thinking about your passions and what drives you. And we can start with that next week if you wish. If there's some things that come up during the week, we will take care of that before we drive forward. Okie dokie. Scotty.
Father God, thank you for this time together and the things that we discover and get encouraged by and challenged by. And it sets our life in motion. It gives us guidance and direction as we learn these different things. And we pray your presence in all of them so as to direct us in the right direction and give us the right passion and give us the right peace, Lord. We love you, Father. It's in your name that we pray our prayers, and we thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody. All right. We'll see you on Sunday.
All right. Good
Bye,
night.
guys.
Night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, Kathy.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Yeah. Good night, Jordana.
Bye.
So we'll see you Sunday, right?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Cool.
I have no
Yep.
idea. I don't know.
We,
I
as
guess
far as
I
I know,
guess
we'll
I'll
see you
find
Sunday.
out. All right. Love you guys.
Bye, dear.